Hello, I'm Dr. Jennifer Degler, and this is Healthy Relationships RX, where we provide powerful prescriptions for successful relationships. And this is the second in our series on talking to your kids about sex. And in particular, this one is about talking to your elementary age child about sex when you're going to have the big talk and answer that question: how does a baby get inside a mother's womb? And whenever I'm encouraging parents to have this talk with their kids sometime between the ages of 6 and 10, so many times parents will say to me, but they're so little, they're so young, I don't want to take away their innocence by telling them about sex. You are not taking away their innocence by giving them correct information that's developmentally appropriate. As a matter of fact, it's a way you safeguard their innocence, because if you don't get there first, someone else will. And oftentimes, the information that they may give them about sex is not innocent and it is not even correct. And so get there first. And I know that this can be scary as a parent. I encourage you to practice and help yourself become more comfortable with that. And I'm going to give you some tips for how to do that in today's video. It is helpful if moms will have the conversation with daughters and if dads will have the conversation with sons, just to make it a little bit more comfortable. However, I know some of you are single moms or single dads, and so you're going to have the conversation with all your kids, regardless of what sex your child is. And I want you to know that God will equip you to have that conversation. He will honor you as you attempt to do the right thing by your child. And it's also okay to enlist a same sex relative as your child. So maybe with a son, maybe a favorite uncle or an aunt with a daughter, if you feel like that would be helpful as well for your child. So the big question is, how does the baby get inside the mother? And sometimes children will just point blank come and ask you this question. So you got to be ready and prepared, because they may ask you that out of the blue. Many times they don't ask the question, though. And so you have to be the one to take the initiative with your child and have this conversation. I know with our kids, with our daughter, when she was 6, she just asked me. She was very curious and she really wanted to know. Our son, Jake, never asked us. And so my husband, Jeff, at some point just took him on a walk and tried to have this conversation with him. Jake was really very much not wanting to have the conversation, but we had it with him anyway. So be ready. Your child may ask, they may not ask, but regardless, but by the time your child is 10, you need to have had this conversation, because most of the time by 4th grade, at least in the public school system, they're going to be presenting your child with this material. So you want to get there first. So I encourage you, be thinking earlier, 6, 7, 8, that you're going to have this conversation with your child. And here's a very simple way to explain sex to your child. And this is going to take really under 30 seconds. I'm assuming you've already told them, as we talked about in the first video, that they understand that babies grow in a special place inside a woman called a womb, and that when the baby's ready to be born, it comes out through a mother's legs through a special opening called a vagina. So they already are aware of those body parts. So you say, here's how the baby gets inside the mother. Married couples have sex. It's this special thing that God created. Sometimes people call it making love. And the daddy puts his penis inside a mother's vagina. And this special liquid comes out called sperm. And it has little teeny tiny sperm in it, and they swim up inside the mother, because she releases a little teeny tiny egg. You can't even see it, it's so small. And the sperm and the egg meet, and the egg becomes fertilized, teeny tiny, and then it floats down and it nestles inside that womb, and then it grows into a baby. And mommies and daddies, this is something that feels good to mommies and daddies. And it's something that only married people do. And God created it as a special way that mommies and daddies could be close to one another and create a baby. Ta-da! That's sex. And you will be surprised at once you explain that, you will feel such relief that you finally had this conversation with your child. And your child may react in several different ways. Sometimes children are quite intrigued and they have questions for you. Other times they are horrified. It just sounds like the most awful thing in the world. And that's developmentally appropriate for them to be horrified, particularly at the thought that their parents are doing this and that their parents even like to do this. um, and that's okay. We want them at this point to be like, this is not something that I want to do when I'm in elementary age. And if they say to you, I can remember saying to my mother, I am never going to do that. And she just kind of smiled at me. But we all know at some point in those teenage years, they're probably going to change their opinion, and sex is going to become something that they become curious about. But you just are simple and straightforward. And as you do that, you're communicating respect for sex, for marriage, for reproduction, and for their future spouse. Now, I encourage you, get a book to help you have this conversation with your child. This is one of my favorite books. This is Jim Burns' book, How God Makes Babies. And what I love about this one is that it has full color photos that are very engaging, and it explains. It talks about sex. It's got some shows about the baby growing. It talks about touch and good touch. It talks about genitalia. So it's got all the questions. See, there we've got the egg and we got the little sperm swimming. So that helps. But you don't have to have a book. But I find that if you get a little book and sit down with your child, you're a lot more likely to have the conversation. And then some children, they want it read to them repeatedly, or they're very intrigued, and other kids, they're like, okay, you've told me, I really don't want to know anymore for now. And either response is fine. It is important after you have the talk with your kids to let them know, listen, you now know this really important information. But not every kid knows how the baby gets in there. So it's important that you don't go to school and tell all the other little kids. And don't go telling your little brother and sister. Don't go telling your younger cousins, because this is something that mommies and daddies want to tell their children. That way you don't get that call from the school saying that your child went to school and proceeded to tell the entire classroom. And then that way they won't get in trouble with the other parents for telling how sex happens. It's also important during this elementary age time that you are putting safeguards on all the screens in the house. So all the laptops, all the iPads, all the phones, that there any screen that your child would have access to, that there's some kind of safeguard so that your child does not inadvertently run across images and information that you would not want them to. Much younger than you would think, your child needs safeguards on all of those screens. In our next video, we're going to be talking about puberty and how to talk to your daughter about puberty and the changes that she's going through. And in our final video, we'll talk about boys and how to talk to them about puberty.